Sandro Tonali makes his position clear as Arsenal come calling. The phone rang on deadline day. Arsenal's sporting director, Andrea Berta, picked it up. On the other end, an agent representing Sandro Tonali, the 25-year-old Newcastle midfielder, one of the most technically gifted players in the Premier League, was being offered to the Gunners. Not as a rumour, not as speculation, as a genuine possibility on the final day of the January transfer window. This is where things could have gone catastrophically wrong for Newcastle United. Not just because losing Tonali would weaken their squad, but because of what it would say about their project, their ambition and their ability to hold on to their best players when the biggest clubs come calling. Eddie Howe has built something at St James Park. Champions League knockout stages, Carabao Cup semi-finals, fighting for European football in the Premier League. Losing Tonali on deadline day would have sent a message that Newcastle are still a selling club, that when Arsenal or any other giant flexes their muscles, Newcastle fold. But here is what actually happened. Tonali has been making one thing very clear to people behind the scenes at Newcastle United. He is very happy at St James Park. He is not thinking about a move to Arsenal. Not now, not on deadline day. His focus is entirely on Newcastle. The Magpies were quick, emphatic, adamant that nothing happened with Tonali on deadline day. They shut down the speculation immediately. Eddie Howe himself confirmed that Tonali wanted to stay at Newcastle when the deadline day rumours started swirling. On the surface, this looks like a clean victory for Newcastle. Player stays loyal, club stands firm, everyone moves on. But scratch beneath that surface and you find something far more complicated. Something that suggests this story is far from over. If you want deeper analysis on stories like this, where we break down not just what happened, but what it means for the clubs involved, hit that subscribe button. We cover the moves that shape the game, the decisions that define seasons, and the transfer sagas that tell you where power really sits in modern football. Subscribe to stay ahead as this situation develops through the summer window, because what happens next with Sandro Tonali and Arsenal could define both clubs' trajectories for years. Now, let me take you through what actually happened here step by step, because the details matter. Arsenal were offered Tonali on transfer deadline day. This is confirmed, not rumoured, not speculated. Arsenal were genuinely offered the player. The Gunners entered into talks. Those talks happened on the final day of the January window, but nothing came of them. The conversations led nowhere. Tonali stayed at Newcastle, but the fact those conversations happened at all tells you everything about where this is heading. David Ornstein, one of the most reliable journalists in football, provided crucial detail on how this went down. It became abundantly clear that Sandro Tonali's agent offered him to Arsenal. But here is where it gets messy. There is confusion about which of Tonali's agents actually holds the most power over his future. There is conjecture over how many agents he has. There is uncertainty about who controls his career decisions. And critically, there is confusion about who exactly offered him to Arsenal on deadline day. What we know for certain is this: the offer went to Andrea Berta, Arsenal's sporting director. Berta's job is to explore opportunities when they arise, especially when a player of interest becomes available. And Sandro Tonali, as Ornstein confirms, is historically a player that Mikel Arteta and Arsenal like. They have been interested before, they have tracked him, they rate him. So when his name came up on deadline day, Berta did his job. He looked into it, he established viability, he explored whether a deal could be done. Then reality hit. It was made clear that there was absolutely no possibility. The deal was dead. Newcastle were not selling. Tonali was not moving, at least not in January. But let me be very clear about what this means. Despite Sandro Tonali making it clear that he is happy at Newcastle United, the effects of him being offered to Arsenal on deadline day are set to carry on into the summer. Luke Edwards, a journalist with strong Newcastle connections, claims that whilst the player remains committed to the Magpies, his long-term future on Tyneside is no longer clear. Read that again. His long-term future is no longer clear. This is not about January. This is about what happens when the summer window opens. This is about whether Newcastle can hold on to one of their most valuable assets when the big clubs come back with serious money and serious intent. Eddie Howe addressed the situation. He said Tonali wanted to stay at Newcastle on deadline day. That statement is important. It confirms Tonali's immediate commitment. But Howe's words also reveal something else. The manager felt the need to publicly reassure people that his midfielder wanted to stay. That alone tells you there was noise, there was uncertainty, there was enough going on behind the scenes that the manager needed to come out and calm things down. And here is the sentence that should worry Newcastle fans. It is clear that something is building ahead of the summer window. Not rumoured, not speculated, clear. Something is building. The foundations are being laid for a serious push from Arsenal or potentially other clubs when the summer comes around. Right now, Tonali is focused on Newcastle. The Toons still have much to play for this season. They are in the Champions League knockout stages. They are in the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup. They are fighting for European qualification in the Premier League. Newcastle need Tonali to be fully focused on them for the rest of the season. And the midfielder has made it clear that is the case, for now at least. That final phrase is doing a lot of work, for now at least. It acknowledges the temporary nature of the current situation. It suggests that what is true today might not be true in 4 months when the summer window opens and the serious money starts getting thrown around. Let me walk you through the financial reality of any potential summer move. Newcastle value Tonali at over £80 million. They paid £55 million to sign him from AC Milan in 2023. They are not going to sell him for less than they paid. They are not going to take a loss on a player who is 25 years old in his prime and central to everything they are trying to build. If Arsenal want Tonali next summer, they are going to have to pay a premium, over £80 million, maybe significantly more if Newcastle dig their heels in. The article includes a fan poll asking what the maximum fee Arsenal should pay to sign Sandro Tonali. One commenter suggests £35 million. Another argues Newcastle will not accept anything less than £100 million and suggests Arsenal should wait until summer and sign Boadi for £40 million instead. A third commenter thinks £70 million could work because Tonali still has room to develop. These numbers matter because they frame the negotiation. Newcastle are not desperate to sell. They do not need the money in the same way they might have a few years ago. They have Champions League football. They have ambition. They have a manager who is building something real. To prize Tonali away, Arsenal will need to pay a fee that makes it impossible for Newcastle to say no. We are talking transformative money, the kind of fee that allows Newcastle to rebuild their midfield with 2 or 3 quality players. But here is what Arsenal see when they look at Sandro Tonali. They see a midfielder who can do everything, technically excellent, physically strong, tactically intelligent, capable of playing as a 6 or as an 8, capable of controlling games, breaking up play, progressing the ball and contributing in both boxes. They see a player who fits exactly what Mikel Arteta wants in his midfield. They see someone who could partner Declan Rice and form one of the best midfield duos in European football. The article includes another fan engagement element, asking readers to fill in the blanks for Arsenal's best midfield trio if Tonali signed. This is not idle speculation. This is Arsenal fans already imagining how Tonali would fit into their team, already thinking about the combinations, already planning the tactics. That kind of excitement among a fan base creates pressure on the club to make the move happen. And here is where the agent situation becomes critical. David Ornstein's reporting highlights confusion about which of Tonali's agents holds the real power within his stable of representatives. This is not a minor detail. This is fundamental to understanding how this transfer saga will play out over the coming months. If there are multiple agents involved, if there is uncertainty about who speaks for Tonali, if there is confusion about who offered him to Arsenal on deadline day, then you have a recipe for chaos. You have a situation where mixed messages can emerge, where one agent might be pushing for a move while another insists the player is happy, where Arsenal might receive encouragement from one camp while Newcastle receive assurances from another. This kind of agent confusion is not unusual in modern football. Top players often have multiple representatives, a primary agent, a lawyer, a family member who acts as an advisor, a former agent who still has some involvement, a new agent who is trying to take control. When big money is involved, when a transfer worth over £80 million is on the table, these competing interests can create genuine problems. What we know for certain is that someone with the authority to speak for Tonali contacted Arsenal on deadline day. Someone made the offer, someone opened the door. Arsenal did not pursue this out of nowhere. They were approached. That approach came from within Tonali's camp, even if there is now dispute about exactly who initiated it and whether they had the authority to do so. Newcastle's response to the deadline day speculation was swift and emphatic. They were adamant that nothing happened with Tonali. They shut down the story immediately. But being adamant is not the same as being secure. The very fact they needed to respond so forcefully suggests they were worried about how the story would play. They were worried about what message it would send if people believed Tonali was genuinely considering a move. And they should be worried because in the summer, Tonali and Arsenal could become a hot topic for discussion. Not might become, could become. That is language that suggests probability, not just possibility. It suggests that people within the game, people with knowledge of how these things work, believe this story has legs beyond January. Let me explain why Arsenal wanted to explore this on deadline day. Arsenal have invested heavily in their midfield. Declan Rice arrived from West Ham for £105 million. They have Jorginho, they have Thomas Partey, they have Martin Odegaard as their captain and primary creator. But there is always room for another elite midfielder, especially one as versatile as Tonali, especially one who is 25 years old and entering his prime years, especially one who has proven himself in Serie A and is now proving himself in the Premier League. When Andrea Berta received the call about Tonali's availability, he had to explore it. Any competent sporting director would. You do not ignore an opportunity to sign a player of that calibre just because the timing is awkward or the situation is complicated. You investigate, you ask questions, you establish whether there is a genuine possibility, and that is exactly what Berta did. The fact the deal did not happen in January does not mean it will not happen in summer. In fact, the opposite might be true. January is always difficult for major transfers. Clubs do not want to disrupt their seasons. Players do not want to move mid-campaign. Agents prefer to wait for summer when there is more time to negotiate and more clubs can get involved in a bidding war. The deadline day approach to Arsenal might have been a testing of the waters, a way to gauge interest, a way to establish that when summer comes around, Arsenal will be ready to make a serious move. Newcastle's valuation of over £80 million is designed to be prohibitive. It is designed to make clubs think twice. It is designed to force Arsenal or anyone else to ask themselves whether Tonali is really worth that kind of money when there are other midfielders available for less. But here is the thing about valuations. They only matter if you are not desperate to sell. And Newcastle are not desperate. They have Champions League football to play. They have a cup semi-final to contest. They have a top 6 finish to chase in the Premier League. Selling Tonali weakens them immediately with no guarantee they can adequately replace him in the same window. So the £80 million valuation is both a deterrent and a statement. It says we do not want to sell. It says if you want him, you will have to blow us away with an offer we cannot refuse. It says we value this player as one of the best midfielders in Europe and we will not let him go cheaply. But every player has a price. Every club has a number where they will consider selling even their most prized assets. For Newcastle and Tonali, that number appears to be somewhere north of £80 million, maybe 90 million, maybe 100 million, but it exists. And Arsenal know it exists, and Tonali's agents know it exists. The summer window will be the real test. That is when Newcastle have to decide whether they can hold on to Tonali for another year or whether the financial and sporting reality forces them to cash in. That is when Arsenal have to decide whether they are willing to spend the kind of money it will take to get the deal done. That is when Tonali himself has to decide whether he wants to stay at a club where he is happy and important, or whether he wants to move to a club that is competing for the Premier League title and has a realistic chance of winning the Champions League. Right now, Tonali is saying all the right things. He is happy at Newcastle. He is focused on their season. He is not thinking about a move. But footballers say these things all the time. They say them because it is the professional thing to do. They say them because they do not want to upset the fans. They say them because they genuinely believe them in the moment, even if circumstances change later. The key detail in all of this is what Luke Edwards reported. Whilst Tonali remains committed to Newcastle, his long-term future on Tyneside is no longer clear. That is the sentence that changes everything. That is the sentence that tells you this story is not over. That is the sentence that tells you we will be talking about Sandro Tonali and Arsenal again when the summer window opens. Eddie Howe needs Tonali focused. He needs him performing at the highest level in these crucial months. Champions League knockout matches are won and lost on the performances of players like Tonali. Cup semi-finals are decided by midfielders who can control the tempo and break up opposition attacks. Top 6 finishes in the Premier League require consistency and quality in the middle of the park. If Tonali's head is turned, if he starts thinking about Arsenal or any other club, it could cost Newcastle in all 3 competitions. That is why Howe came out and publicly stated that Tonali wanted to stay on deadline day. It was not just information, it was reassurance. It was a message to the player, to the fans, to the board and to rival clubs. It was saying, we have this under control, our player is committed. Do not test us again until summer, but summer will come. And when it does, Arsenal will likely come back. They will have had months to prepare their offer. months to work on the structure of the deal, months to convince themselves that Tonali is the missing piece in their quest for the Premier League title. And Tonali will have had months to think about his future, months to consider whether Newcastle's project is enough for him, months to imagine what it would be like playing at the Emirates, partnering Declan Rice, competing for the biggest trophies in football. The agent confusion adds another layer of uncertainty to all of this. If there genuinely is dispute about who controls Tonali's career, if different representatives are pulling in different directions, if Newcastle do not have clarity about who they need to negotiate with, then this situation could become messy very quickly. Transfer sagas involving agent disputes rarely end cleanly. They drag on, they involve public statements and denials, they create tension between player and club, they often result in the player moving because the relationship has been damaged beyond repair. Newcastle paid £55 million for Tonali in 2023. That was a statement signing. That was Newcastle announcing themselves as a serious force in the transfer market. That was them saying we can compete with the biggest clubs for the best players. Losing him 2 years later, even for a profit, would feel like a step backwards. It would feel like they cannot quite get over the final hurdle, like they cannot hold on to their best players when the truly elite clubs come calling. Arsenal see Tonali as someone who can elevate them to the next level. They have built a squad capable of challenging Manchester City. They have a manager in Mikel Arteta who has proven he can compete with Pep Guardiola. They have young players like Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli who are entering their prime. They have invested in defence and attack. Now they want to add one more world-class midfielder to complete the puzzle. And that is what makes this story so compelling. Both clubs have legitimate reasons for their positions. Newcastle want to keep building. They want to establish themselves as a Champions League regular. They want to prove they can compete domestically and in Europe without having to sell their best players. Arsenal want to win the Premier League. They want to dethrone Manchester City. They want to build a dynasty under Arteta, and they believe Tonali is the player who can help them do it. The deadline day approach was just the opening chapter. Arsenal tested the waters. They established interest. They let Newcastle know they are serious. They let Tonali know they want him. That groundwork has been laid. When summer comes, when the real negotiations begin, both clubs will know exactly where they stand. Tonali's public stance is clear. He is happy at Newcastle. He is committed to their project. He is focused on finishing the season strong. But his long-term future is no longer clear. That gap between his current commitment and his long-term uncertainty is where this story will be decided. Newcastle need him to stay. Their entire project depends on keeping their best players and adding to them. If they lose Tonali, it sends a message that they are still a stepping stone. Still a club that develops players for the true elite. Still not quite at the level where they can tell Arsenal or anyone else to back off. Arsenal need him to move. They have identified him as the player who can complete their midfield. They have the money to make it happen. They have the sporting project to convince him. They have the history and prestige that still matters to players, no matter how much we pretend it does not. What happens next will define both clubs' summers. It will define whether Newcastle can truly establish themselves among England's elite. It will define whether Arsenal can add the final pieces to a title-winning squad. It will define whether Tonali sees his future at St James Park or whether he believes his destiny lies elsewhere. For now, he is staying, he is focused, he is committed. But something is building, the foundations have been laid, and when summer comes, we will find out whether Newcastle's £80 million valuation is enough to keep Arsenal at bay, or whether the Gunners will blow that number out of the water and bring Sandro Tonali to the Emirates Stadium.